John F. Kennedy was the 35th President of the United States. He was born on May 29th, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was an Irish Catholic, and he was raised with 9 other siblings, two of which were his brothers, Robert and Ted Kennedy, who also ran for president. Kennedy's father was a very wealthy man involved in stock trading and a multitude of other business ventures which brought him millions. His mother served as mayor for Boston at one point in her life. JFK served as his father's secretary when his father was the U.S. ambassador to England. He was a Harvard man, graduating in 1940 with a Bachelor of Arts in Government. The following year, he enlisted into the Navy to join the fight against the Axis powers overseas. John was not the only Kennedy boy to go to war. His older brother Joe fought alongside him, but sadly died during the war. JFK was awarded the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism after leading a troop of men out of harm's way during battle. John had suffered a few serious injuries overseas, and when he came home, he would live with back pain along with Addison disease. He was prescribed amphetamines to treat his Addison's disease, but at the time they did not realize the dangers of that drug, and he grew a dependency on it. After returning home from war, he married Jacqueline Bouvier in Newport, Rhode Island. At their wedding, there were over 800 people. The two were married for 10 years before JFK was assassinated. Despite their outward appearance, their marriage had its issues. JFK had a trouble with being unfaithful. Rumors were circulating that he had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, which the Secret Service and him worked very hard to cover up and make sure that it wasn't too far out. JFK and Jackie bore 4 children, but unfortunately 2 of them died shortly after they were born. His family always wanted him to be president. They were heavily involved in politics, but Kennedy was not made president out of nepotism. The man worked himself raw in the political circuit. After coming home from his deployment, he became a congressman for Boston, serving 3 consecutive terms in the House of Representatives, eventually working his way up to be part of the Senate. JFK was a very forward-thinking Democrat, arguing that people needed better wages and he wanted to make housing more affordable. He was a big proponent of the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. JFK almost won the Democratic nomination for vice president in 1956, but was unsuccessful. This minor setback in his political career was the starting point for his 1960 presidential campaign. It was a close race, but in the end, JFK and his running mate Lyndon Johnson beat Richard Nixon by just over 100 electoral votes and over 100,000 in the popular vote. Kennedy had become president at a very volatile time in American history. The civil rights movement was well underway. Many civil rights leaders attacked him because they felt he wasn't doing enough for the movement. But Kennedy was a genuine supporter of the civil rights movement. In 1963, he worked very hard to pass a bill through Congress, which would eventually be approved in 1964 after his death, which would forbid discrimination based on race, gender, or religion. Kennedy spoke out on television, calling civil rights a moral issue. When Martin Luther King Jr. was imprisoned, JFK reached out to Coretta Scott King and offered his help to get King out of legal trouble. America was also hip deep in the Cold War with the Soviets at the time Kennedy reached the office. During the election, Kennedy criticized Eisenhower for allowing a pro-Soviet government to emerge in Cuba. One of Kennedy's biggest failures during his presidency was the Bay of Pigs invasion, in which America funded many Cuban exiles to invade, try to invade on Fidel Castro. They expected the support of the Cuban civilians and even some of their military, but they did not receive that. Everyone who participated in the Bay of Pigs was either captured or killed by Fidel Castro. Nuclear weapons were becoming very popular at the time amongst different militaries across the world, which led to an arms race between the Soviets and America. In October of 1962, American spy planes photographed the construction of a few missile sites in Cuba, which were being sponsored by the Soviets. Kennedy retaliated against Cuba by creating a naval blockade around the island, keeping everyone from entering or exiting. Eventually, the crisis ended with America pledging not to invade Cuba as long as they removed the missiles that they had constructed. JFK did not want to end the Cold War, and he was strongly against communism and feared that if left unregulated, would one day rip Americans from their freedoms. During his campaign for re-election in 1964, or for the 1964 election, JFK was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald while driving in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. The president was shot in his head. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was futile. The damage was done. His vice president was sworn into the presidency not long after this occurred. President Kennedy was not a perfect leader, but he certainly was a good one. He was deeply an opinionated man who fought for what he thought was right, always trying to make America and the world a better place for everyone. He was the youngest president, and if given more time, he certainly would have changed the world. Lee Harvey Oswald was taken into custody by Dallas police and eventually was murdered by Jack Ruby.